Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today we are going to talk about Bossk Control. So Bossk Control is the deck that recently took out the #1 spot of the biggest Star Wars Unlimited tournament. In the same way we saw Vader Blue taking down the 4K tournament in Orlando, we're seeing a shift in the meta where control decks are, hard control decks, are really starting to become a thing in this set too. Personally, I always knew that hard control was going to be a thing in set 2. I just didn't know in what way. I've experimented for a long time with Boba control, and it turns out that it was not the best approach, at least at this stage of the meta. And I'll explain later on what are the advantages of specifically this version of Bossk Control over another one. So first of all, before we start this deck video, this is obviously my own version of the deck that I'm showing here on the screen, but obviously gotta give it credit to where credit is due. It is obviously the strongly inspired by the list that won the Barcelona tournament. Jordan Nel de la Cruz Vizcara was is the person who made the results with this deck. I don't know if he's the inventor, but at least he's the one who did the performance here in the #1 seed. So obviously this happens about a week ago, so I had time to try the deck for myself. I actually played some version of Bossk Control before even the Barcelona tournament, so this deck was known to me even before that. But I did not had the time nor took the time to really play with the deck. But this time around, I really did my homework, and I've managed to experiment by myself the power of this deck. And in this video, I will of course explain at length what are the reasons for different card choices that I've made, what changes I've made to the deck, why I think is currently one of the strongest hard deck you can play in Star Wars Unlimited, what are its strengths, but also we're going to talk about the weaknesses and how you can counter this deck. So I've played this deck all week, and then I played this deck yesterday in my local showdown that I've managed to win. So I had so I won the 4 ones of Swiss, and then I won the final with this deck against a variety of different decks. So now I feel like I have enough competitive experience to be able to talk in detail about this and everything you need to know about Bossk Control, whether you want to play it or you want to play against it. So what is the main idea? So it is a hard control similar to the Vader control deck that we saw, or even similar to the Iden control deck that I've shown on my channel previously, that I call the Dominatrix Iden. So it is a red-blue control deck that is trying to basically slow down the game as much as possible, playing with a lot of removal, and then we'll end the game either with mill using vigilances or by playing super strong top-end cards. So this deck has the options to finish game relatively quickly just by dropping relatively big units, as opposed to some of the Iden blue that you saw roaming around in the previous meta that were really almost entirely based around the vigilance. This one is really much more balanced, where it can really kill you fairly quickly using very, very large top-end cards. So I'm gonna go into details about every single card in the deck, so you have a better idea on how this deck actually functions. And this deck, so first of all, the one of the reasons why I think the Boba yellow deck is struggling a little bit right now is because it has a relatively bad matchup versus Aggro. And one of the great thing about the Bossk control deck is like this Bossk, it doesn't have any problem against Aggro. And the reason is because it has a better package of early game removal with open fire and force choke, and it has very strong combos that allows him to gain a lot of HP, whether it is with the client on top targets that you can trigger twice with Bossk. And I think this is the main thing that sets apart those two decks, and the reason why in a meta that is the current meta, I would recommend Bossk Control over Boba Blue for that very reason. Boba Blue, of course, has other advantages that we will talk about later, but for now, this is in the meta that we're in, where obviously Sabine Green is still very much a threat to be reckoned with. Bossk Control seems to be a more balanced choice, in my opinion. So let's go into the card-by-card analysis, starting first with our friend Bossk here. So Bossk is a very good leader because it has very good stats. So the 4-6 for 5, in a 4-6 for 5 stat line, and it has also the ability, and this is really the most important part of this card by far, is the ability to collect bounty twice. And this, combined with the bounty that we play in the deck, allows us to really make a tremendous amount of value, and it's relatively, and this will allows us to win the early game, which is really the thing. Is like if you're playing a hard control deck and you're able to get away in the early game thanks to a double death mark or a double top targets in order to heal yourself back up or to draw like a bunch of cards depending on the matchup, this wins you the game in the early stages of the game. And obviously if you can be ahead in the early stages, then the late game is only going to get better because you're playing a super strong late game deck. Another thing that is interesting about this leader is obviously the ping ability here, the ability to place a bounty on something and then kill that thing. So it means that the deck is going to have an easy time dealing with any very small unit with only 1 health. And even if it has 2 health, then being able to kill this unit over 2 turns is relatively easy, and then you do get to collect the bounty after that. So this is also a very strong control ability. The ability to give a +1 attack is incredibly situational, but it can be relevant if you put a bounty on something and the unit has basically, and you're holding a card like Fail the Dragon. Fail the Dragon only works on units that has 5 attack or more. You can actually use Bossk to give that unit +1 attack, and suddenly you can defeat that unit using Fail the Dragon. So this is actually can be sometimes relevant. There's also some extremely rare case scenario where you can put a bounty on your own unit and then ping itself, so then you can attack and deal lethal damage, but that's just so incredibly rare. I don't know if this ever happened to me even once with all the games I've played with this deck. So without further ado, let's get into the different cards from the cheapest to the lowest. We'll start with obviously Top Target. Top Target is the most amount of healing that you can do with a single card in the entire game, and this by itself makes the card incredibly good. Obviously the ability to, even on a non-unique unit, being able to heal 4 is very respectable. And of course the fact that you can heal units can also be sometimes relevant, even though most of the time you're going to be choosing to heal your base. And being able to heal 6 is obviously incredible, and obviously this card is really even better when you get to double it with Bossk. So this is exactly a good example of a great card, a card that is pretty good just by itself, but then becomes so much better whenever you can combine it with Bossk. And not only that, it's not only about healing, it's also about being able to kill something sometimes. It can be just a completely valid play, even if you have your base is full health. Just play Top Target on something that has 1 health, like a Wing Leader or even a Greedo, and then ping it to death immediately. Even if you don't get the healing, just using as a 1 resource removal is completely valid in some situations, even though of course more time you're going to be trying to get advantage of the healing. So it's a very flexible card, and in my opinion, so in my version of the deck I played 3 copies of it, while the version of Jordan only played a 2. In my opinion, this card is well worth the 3 slots from my experience. Next we got Deathmark, which is very similar to, so it's another bounty. It's the other bounty that is just incredibly powerful if you get to trigger it twice, but this is obviously going to be for the more control-y, more grindy matchup. The ability to gain a lot of card advantage from this card is just incredibly powerful. So drawing 2 cards is not bad by itself. Being able to draw a card and also make it so you can actually ping it with Bossk already by itself is quite nice. Of course, if you can get the double draw and draw 4 cards, assuming you don't die in the early stage of the game, it's almost an auto win in those kind of very grindy matchup, which there's plenty of, whether you're talking about Younghan, Kira, the Palpatine decks, the other control decks, and all that kind of thing. Deathmark is just going to be absolutely incredible and well worth the 3 copies. I don't think the deck would be possible without this card. The card advantage that it provides, very valuable in a control deck. Obviously, it's not going to be good against everything. It's a very aggressive deck. It's obviously not as good, but it's still decent because it, once again, sometimes can allow you to defeat a unit that you shouldn't be able to defeat. If you, once again, play this on a unit that has 1 health and just kill that unit right away, you do get quite a bit of value from that as well. So next we got obviously the good old Entrench. Entrench is more of a like kind of a last resort card. It's not the card that you want to play very aggressively because your opponent is most because it makes it so your power dark side becomes a lot worse. So it's not like the and sometimes of course giving +3/+3 to a unit can be very annoying because you will be able to defeat your own unit. With all that being said, Entrench is incredible because it does something that no other card can do, which is neutralize almost anything for 2 resources. So what I mean by this is that obviously you're going to be playing this on your opponent units to prevent them from attacking your base, and this makes it so it's what I call the last resort removal. It's a card that you're going to be using really when you don't have any other choice, and you're going to be preventing your opponent from attacking that unit, and that's just incredible. This will save your life in many occasions. Obviously, playing your Entrench on your own unit is something that we want to do in a lot of cases as well. We play 3 copies of Child Sense, so if we know opponent is not playing anything that can counter this, having a 7/7 or even sometimes a 8/8 or 9/9 Child Sense can be incredibly difficult to get rid of. And not only that, you can also play this on your Bossk to keep your Bossk alive longer. The longer your Bossk stays alive, the more you're going to be able to get some value out of your bounties. So there's obviously plenty of other ways to use this card, but this is going to be so it's just a really good card in this deck. Next we got False Choke. False Choke is sort of the card that really helps against aggro deck. So in the aggro deck, of course, now Aggro has a lot of very large units that are able to completely take over the game very quickly, and False Choke allows you to deal with them. It one-shots most of the 3/5 or 5 that we see roaming in the meta, like the Cassians. It's also very good against Tech and DJ, the DJ Tech combo if you're playing against Han Yellow. And it counters like a numbers of different cards in the meta. So it's very good against aggressive deck or decks that really rely on those 5 health units to really take over the game. And in those kind of matchup, making your opponent draw a card is not that big of a deal because your main priority is going to be surviving the game, and a few extra cards that your opponent is going to draw is not really going to allow this deck to beat you in the late game. Like it's not even with a few extra draws, Sabine is not able to compete with you in late game. All you need to do is just keep yourself alive, and False Choke does this extremely well. And one of the reasons why red is such a good choice for a control deck at the moment. So we play 2 copies of it in main deck and 1 in the sideboard. Make an Opening is a similar card as False Choke. It's not a card that you want to play in every matchups, but it's going to be able to answer you in some particular situations. Obviously, being able to kill units that are relatively low attack and heal yourself is just plain very good, but it counters a number of different cards. We got Crafty Smugglers, 7th Feet Defender, all those cards with shields that can be extremely annoying to deal with normally, and you don't want to be spending an expensive removal to get rid of them. Make an Opening will do the job and heal you at the same time. It's also one of the few answers that we have to TIE Phantoms in the main deck. Without this card, you have no answer to TIE Phantoms, and this can make you lose the game. So Make an Opening is a great answer to that as well. So we play 2 in the main deck and 1 in the sideboard. We got the Open Fire, which is another great flexible removal. Can shoot in the air, on the ground for damage deals with a lot of different units in the early stage of the game. It is the reason why, once again, red is so much more consistent than a mono blue control deck, because you get so much more of those early game removal, while a mono blue deck can only rely on power the dark side. So to stabilize the early stage of the game. Well, this Open Fire does that. Power Dark Side, of course, the best single target removal. No really much to say about this. It's just obviously an auto include in any control-y blue deck. Then we, of course, have the Client, which is our third bounty outlet. The Client has multiple purpose. I mean, obviously, it's a very good body, the 2/5 shielded for 3. Usually, I don't like playing early game units in a control deck simply because it gives purpose to the enemy ambush units, and it also gives purpose to enemy early game removal. But the Client is an exception to this because he's incredibly tough to deal with. He has 5 health and he's shielded, so he's actually quite difficult to get rid of, and Mishman is going to spend time trying to deal with the Client. That's a good thing for me. His 2 attacks can allow it to weaken enemy units so they can be killed by other things, and can also be used to simply just kill, like, so if you're playing against, like, let's say against something like Han, you're going to be a young Han is going to be playing like some Yodas damaged right from the first turn of the game. Being able to kill those easily with a Client can be very nice. And obviously there is this ability which in my opinion, this is I haven't been a big fan of the client because I think he's overall just too slow. But if there's one deck in which the client is absolutely worth it, it is in this one because of the ability to double redeem the bounty. One of the problem with the client is the fact that he's very slow. If you want to kill something, you want to first use the bounty, then the opponent has the chance to attack you, and then kill the unit, which means that the benefit of healing is not as high because you took a lot of damage while you could have dealt that card before it attacked you. But in the context of, once again, of a boss deck, and you can double redeem the damage, the healing, it is going to be super relevant. Then suddenly the 10 heal, it doesn't matter if the unit attacked you, you're going to be healing for so much that it's going to be well worth it to spend a few extra actions on doing that. Another great thing about the client, of course, is the fact that it's a redundant way to get a removal, it's a redundant outlet of healing. So you can use the ability again and again and again and again to make yourself, to lock the game out and completely win the game. Obviously, this also can be used as a pseudo removal where you're going to put the bounty, then deal 1 damage to that unit. So it's almost you get to tap, even if you don't get to kill that unit that turn, just the ability to boot a bounty on something, deal 1 damage to Bossk, so then you can finish it, this unit off with a removal is extremely valuable, or just simply deal with 1 health unit. That is just by itself extremely valuable. So it's obviously an amazing card in this deck. Next we got Lieutenant Charleston. So it is a classic of hard control deck that are very heavily blue, which is the case of our deck. So most of the time our idea is to skip our turn 1 play because we're just interested in playing a removal on turn 2 to deal with something. And then play on turn 3 our Lieutenant Charleston with 4 blue cards in hand and make this a 6/6 Sentinel for 4, which is obviously incredibly powerful and way up the curve in terms of expected stats. So it's a very great defensive card against aggressive decks. It's almost most likely going to be forcing the opponent to be using their wrecker or their Poe to be able to get rid of it, and even then they will lose the unit as a result, or the unit will become just extremely weak that you can just ping it off with Bossk or something. So it's just going to force your opponent to mobilize tremendous amount of resources to get rid of it, and also it's going to protect your Bossk. If your opponent using his opponent Podamron or Wrecker to deal with Charleston is not using it on your Bossk, and you know what happened if Bossk stay alive, you get to double redeem a top target or a client bounty and you just win the game. So it is just a very good card in this deck. It's not... next we got, of course, our removal. Fell the Dragons, 2 copies in the main deck, 1 copy in the sideboard. So compared to the version of Jordan, I play a lot more single target removal because I don't want to be in a situation where I don't have the answer to an enemy unit. And I feel like when I was playing fewer removal, way too often I would end up in a situation where I do not get the removal that I want. That here this time, so I play a lot more removal than he does for that reason. So Fell the Dragon, obviously, deal with all those large units for a relatively cheap cost is very, very valuable. It's this card. We play a deck that has enough early game removal that it's in a deck like Bossk, it's definitely better to be playing removal that are a bit more situational because we play such a wide amount of removal, we don't need to have a catch-all answer to everything. Most of the case, we're going to have a hand with Open Fire, Fell the Dragon, and like False Choke. So we have those specialized removal, and we can use the one that we want and the situation where we want. So Fell the Dragon is very good, of course. Is the best card to deal with very large units. Then, of course, we got Pillage. So I was not a big fan of Pillage because, to me, one of the main reasons to be playing a control deck is to basically render certain cards of your opponent's deck useless, like early game removal, that kind of thing, because we don't play any unit, that kind of thing. And it feels like if you're going to be playing Pillage, your opponent is simply going to discard his useless cards from his hand. And the Pillage is not going to be very effective. Obviously, this is because I was playing Pillage wrong. So if you're playing Pillage in a control deck, you shouldn't be playing Pillage on curve on turn 3, because in this case, your opponent is going to have plenty of cards to discard. You should be, of course, playing Pillage when your opponents start to run low end cards, and then being able to play Pillage at the right moment will win you the game, and or at least get rid of the very powerful answer the very powerful late game card your opponent might have. So it's very effective against Ram control deck, notably as they're going to be spending a lot of cards trying to ramp up, and then You play pillage at the right moment, you can remove their units that are extremely difficult to answer, such as, for example, even something as simple as just a Vader, or obviously even more powerful things like Relentless. So this card is just very good for that. Just the ability also to do just a 2-for-1 is also very valuable in very grindy matchup. Like if you're playing against Young An, it's all about all of card advantage. And Pillage really helps with this card advantage because you do a 2-for-1 on the opponent, and that's just very good. So I really like this card in this deck, and it was definitely a great addition. Not something that I would initially consider for a hard control deck, but it turned out to be a really good card if played at the right moment. Then obviously we got the Takedown, which is just a classic removal that I think is still very much worth playing as a 3-of. Then of course we got Vigilance, which is our win conditions in a lot of cases where we can just mill the opponent and the opponent runs out of card and we win the game. Very flexible. We can use it to shield our Bossk if we want to keep it alive, but obviously more often than not we're going to deal with something and heal ourselves, so it's another outlet of healing that is less conditional than the bounties that we have and more immediate. So Vigilance, of course, still an absolute necessity in this deck. Rival's Fall as a 2-of, as obviously kind of a more flexible thing. Whenever you're playing a control deck, you need to be answering everything, and Rival's Fall does answer everything. It defeats enemy leaders. If we didn't have Rival's Fall, we would have to rely on a very lucky power of the dark side or on a super laser blast to be able to get rid of a Boba Fett with Boba Fett armor. Rival Fall gives us an answer to this. It's in a lot of cases the extra cost doesn't really matter, and the flexibility is very useful. So I do play basically a mix between Rival's Fall and Fail the Dragon. I think Rival's Fall has proven to be quite strong. Then obviously once we've dragged the game to the late game, this is where we're going to be starting to put more proactive stuff. Emperor Palpatine is one of those. It is basically a 6/6 overwhelm attached to sort of an overwhelming barrage, which is just incredibly powerful. So we have the strategy here for the late game is to have a collection of different late game cards, and each of them do something different. Emperor Palpatine is expert in dealing with multiple units with relatively low health. Supreme Leader Snoke does the same thing, but in a different way. There's matchups in which Palpatine is better, there's matchup where Snoke is better, so depending on situation we either play one or the other, and of course if we can have both of them, then it's very strong. One of the things with hard control is that obviously you do get to draw a lot of cards and you make games very long, which means that it is usually a better idea to have a collection of different powerful late game cards instead of just playing 3 times the same card. And our deck definitely does this. I don't think Jordan's deck plays the Snoke, and I think he should, because it gives like a different a wider amount of different options that you can play in the later stage of the game. So we play 1 Snoke in the main deck and 1 in the sideboard. Obviously we got the Super Laser Blast, which is obviously a necessity in a control deck to reset the board and transition the game from a survival mode to the dominance mode, which is sort of the dynamic of the control matchup. You first stabilize the game, and then you start dominating the game with your late game answers. With your late game cards. So Super Laser Blast is really the card that transition from one part to the other part of the game. So obviously absolutely necessary as a 3-of. So talking about late game things, we got Great Dragon, which is obviously the ultimate finisher that can finish the game extremely quickly, puts a huge board of massive units on the board, can be used either to deal with enemy units or deal a tremendous amount of damage in the base and finish the game in a few turns, which can be very important in the context of a tournament where you need to finish games and win it. And of course we have Avenger, which is for a situation where we have a board that is relatively empty, only 1 unit on the board. Avenger puts a threat and deal with that unit, and then also helps you lock the game out as you get to attack over and over. So Great Dragon, we have 2 in the main deck, 1 on the sideboard, and Avenger we have 3 in the main deck. I believe it is the late game card that we use the most often in this. That's why I play 3-of, the 3-of. So before we go to this card, so I'm going to go back to the list. So we see it's a 2-1-1-3-2 splits for the late game cards. This gives us a wide variety of different late game answers in the later stage of the game. Some of the most powerful late game cards in the game are available in those colors. So this is one of the other advantages of playing a red. And we do have more copies of those late game cards in the sideboard. to, of course, in a very grindy matchup where those late game cards are going to be particularly powerful. So now that we talked about the card by card, let's talk a bit about the sideboard and the different matchups. So we'll talk about first the aggro matchup. So as I said earlier, I think aggro in general is a fairly good matchup. We have a lot of early game removal and we have a lot of heal. So in this matchup, we're going to add False Choke, Make an Opening, and Super Leader Snoke. So that's going to be sort of the way we stabilize the game. So Super Leader Snoke is just a great late game card against aggro. Once this is on the board, then all the unit becomes pretty useless. It also allows us to completely wipe the board. So Create a Dragon, on the other hand, is not really the kind of late game card you want to have against an aggro deck. It's quite expensive at 9. And dealing damage to the mid base is like sometimes it helps you finish the game very early and very fast, but it doesn't actually help you stabilizing the game, so it's not very useful. And restock against aggro, you're never gonna have a chance to play the restock. I actually completely forgot about restock, so I'm just gonna go previously and talk about restock a little bit. So I'm playing 1 copy of restock in the main deck, and this card has been amazing to me. It's a card that you want to play, of course, against hard control decks when games go very, very long, and you play restock, of course, to put cards back into your deck, and this can be a game-winning move. So it's a card that it takes very little slots in the deck. It's only 1 slot, but in those kind of matchup, this 1 slot makes a huge difference. Unless your opponent is able to mill it with his own vigilance, having a restock in your hand is a huge security against those kind of decks. It's only 1 slot and it's going to win you a lot of games. In my tournament, in my showdown, I actually won 2 games with that card. So just a single slot that won me 2 games single-handedly, that's by itself enough. Why is it in the main deck and not in the sideboard? Simply because most of the games that are very, very long are usually like first games, because then on second and third game, you really rarely have the occasion to go so long on those games because then you go to time. So really where this card makes the huge difference is on game 1, on the first game it's very, very long, and then you end up winning the game 1-0 and you go to the next round this way. So just an incredible card that I strongly advise you to be running as a one-of in the main deck. So going back to the sideboard, so obviously against aggro, restock is not really what we want. So that's basically the plan. More removal, better late game answers. The deck is already very stacked against aggro, so we don't need much more than this. This sideboard is also valid for Boba Yellow, by the way. This is kind of the same sideboard for Boba Yellow as well. So then this is my sideboard against control decks in general. So this includes Ram control, hard control decks, but also Han deck, the young Han blue. So in this deck, we're obviously going to be prioritizing on putting more threats. So Create a Dragon, more answers with Fell the Dragon, more late game answers, more late game threats, more ways to provide card advantage. So I'm not playing Dr. Pershing in my main deck as opposed to Jordan's version, because I believe that in a lot of matchups, especially in game 1, the Dr. Pershing is just going to be a magnet of removal, a magnet of ambush unit. It's just going to give purpose to the enemy early removal and an ambush unit that otherwise would be kind of useless. So it's just very rare that I get to draw more than 1 card with this card, so it ends up just not being that useful to me. However, after sideboard, in a specific matchup where card advantage is particularly important, I felt like Dr. Pershing was a great asset, not only because the opponent will have a tendency to side out some of his ambush unit and some of his removal, making Dr. Pershing more likely to stick to the board, and also the ability to draw a bunch of cards and do card advantage is extremely important in those matchups. So I thought this card was much better suited for the sideboard than the main deck. That's why I have 2 in the sideboard. And then instead of playing the Spark of Rebellion that Jordan was playing, I'm playing instead Bazine. So I have a few things that I prefer with Bazine. Basically, Bazine is going to be either 4 resources if you play from your hand, so 2 resources cheaper than the Spark of Rebellion, or it's going to be the same price if you play it for the Smuggle. So obviously, if you're playing for Smuggle, then you're effectively doing card advantage because you're not playing a card from your hand. So the fact the opponent is drawing a card from it is not as big of a deal because you're making also card advantage by doing it. And if you're playing it for its normal cost, then you're playing it for cheaper. But not only that, you are discarding the opponent card, but you're also adding a 1/3 on the board, which is very relevant in the control matchup where it will absorb the enemy power to the dark side. It will allow you to basically go over those power dark sides, and that's just very valuable. So I found Bazine to be very, very good. This extra body is very relevant to me. The fact that you can play it from Smuggle is very relevant. And the fact that opponent get to draw a card is not really that big of a deal, because in those kind of matchup, you're mostly trying to get rid of like super late game answers. There's very specific card that you want to deal with. You want to deal with things like Relentless. Trust me, if you manage to discard like something like a Vigilance in a hard control mirror, or a Relentless against a Palpatine deck, you don't really care that opponent draws a card. You've basically got rid of the important card anyway, so it's kind of like super relevant. And obviously also drawing a card makes them closer to getting milled out as well. But I mean, obviously it's better to outright discard a card. All I'm saying is that the downside of drawing a card is not really that big of a deal. And on the other hand, Bazin has so many upsides, being cheaper, can be played on smuggles, provides a body and all that to play around Power Dark Side and all that kind of stuff. So I usually personally prefer Bazin by quite a bit. Okay, so yeah, that's basically the plan. Obviously, we get rid of the top target, so healing is not that big importance in the matchup. The Force Choke makes your opponent draw cards for removal, not really worth it, and make an opening just doesn't kill enough most of the time. So matchup here against Hold Hand. So against Hold Hand, we have more of a kind of a dedicated sideboard, because this deck kind of plays very differently from the others. So this time we want to have more Force Choke, because we want to be able to get rid of. We want to have more answers to the tech slash DJ combo. This combo is extremely powerful against us. We want to make sure that those tech will be dealt with whenever possible. We play also a very powerful late game card like Kree Dragon, Super Leader Snoke. One of the characteristics of Hold On, whether it's the yellow version or the green version, is that they don't have access to very strong removal to deal with very large units. So Kree Dragon and Super Leader Snokes are just incredibly annoying to deal with for Hold On, and this is why we add more of them. And then Dr. Pershing, because those matchups can sometimes be very grindy, so we need to get those extra cards. What we side out in this matchup is restock. Games usually don't go that long. The healing, most likely not useful. This can change if I'm playing against the Hold On yellow. I would actually not play the Pershing, and I would keep the top target, because top target can deal with a lot of 1 health unit. If I'm running against the green version, then I'll keep the Dr. Pershing and side out the top targets. And then the Entrench. Entrench is just not super useful in this matchup. Like most of the time, there's not really any super large units that we really want to deal with Entrench. With Entrench, like for example, you put this on the best you can hope is put this on the Han unit. And even that is not that useful. Like you would rather just spare the other cards. So Entrench hasn't been proven to be super good. Sometimes putting this on the Falcon, opponents can just bounce Falcon back in his hand and stuff like this. So didn't find Entrench to be particularly good in this matchup. Okay, so this is against my subling is Boba Green. So I'm talking about a Boba Green that would be very value focused, like similar to the one that Josh was playing during that won the Manchester tournament with. In this case, of course, we want to make an opening more answers to TIE Phantoms, the Super Leader Snoke, because he plays a lot of units with low health that Crafty Smugglers, all the 7th Feet Defender, all the small little unit that he plays. Super Snoke is very strong against this. Felder Dragon is more answers because he plays Fire Spray, Vader, and Maul. I like to side out the Legion Chalcen because this actually was pointed out by one of my opponents when I was playing in my showdown, was telling me that Chalcen is terrible versus Boba Green, and I actually agree with him. It just gives purpose to the opponent ambush units and allows him to actually do some crazy Boba shenanigans. Usually not something you want to be enabling in this matchup. So moving on to so this is kind of like the crux of the sideboard and the way we play sideboard. So now that we talked about the different counters to this to the different aspect of this list with the sideboard in the main deck, I wanted to talk about the card choices and some of the cards that I decided to not run in this deck. So here you go. We're gonna start here with Devotion. Devotion is a card that sometimes has been used for a recurrent way to heal. I feel like we don't really need that in this deck because we have access to the client, which pretty much does that recurrent healing aspect and does it, of course, much better. Devotion, I play a version of the deck that plays very few units, which means that Devotion is going to be quite situational. So it is a card that you can think about adding to your deck if you want to have even more outs against aggro, but it's decided I've decided to not run personally. So then we got Infernal Fall, which is another card that control players like to play. It gives you early game presence in space, and the card filtering is also pretty relevant. The problem with Infernal Fall is like it doesn't really deal with much of anything. Like most of the opponent units doesn't really deal with them. I would rather not play turn 1 to make my Child Send stronger, so they can skip my turn 1 and make my Child Send +1/+1 and play removal on turn 2. Infernal Fall with this 2/3 stat line doesn't really deal with much in the current meta. So I thought the card was fine, decided to exclude it. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but this is what I've decided to do. Character Sensor, at the very least, doesn't have the same filtering aspect, but it has a couple of cool things. First of all, it can deal with enemy units, most of the enemy space units, so as a kind of a removal in space, and it can be also useful because a lot of people are going to be running Pillage against you, and Tire Sensor can allow you to get a little bit of value from those Pillage sometimes. It's fairly situational, but it can happen. With all that being said, I think that obviously the discard effect is extremely situational, and it remains just a removal that is very specialized into space. I would rather play removal that can be played indefinitely in space or ground, so I already have the right answers in the right time. Pike Sentinel, I made the choice to not play any early game units in this deck because I didn't want it to give purpose to the opponent ambush and the opponent removal, and that's why Pike Sentinel did not make it to the deck. Also, Pike Sentinel not nearly as good in the Bossk deck that it would be in the Kira deck because Kira can give shield to Pike Sentinels, make it a lot better. We don't have that option in Bossk, making Pike Sentinels a lot worse. Search Your Feelings is a card that's been used by hard control players in order to help in the mirror match to get vigilances and stuff like this. I found the card to be pretty slow. I can imagine a world where I would want to play this card, but currently this is not what I've been wanting to. My kind of idea is that if you are in a meta that is heavy on out control, I would not play a Bossk deck. I would play Boba Blue if I was going to be running in a meta that was full of hard control, which is currently not the case, but it might be the case in a few weeks from now as I'm shooting this video. So in my opinion, if you're in a situation where you feel like you need to run Search Your Feelings in order to improve your matchup against hard control, maybe you should be playing a different deck. And I wouldn't even play like stuff like Bounty Hunter Crew to get back the vigilances from the discard instead of playing Search Your Feelings. Then we got Bombing Run. Once again, we're not a card that is definitely a consideration, but I don't think we're in a meta where Bombing Run is really that strong. So decided to not run it because it's not really that good of a card in the current meta. But obviously with the Twilight of the Republic it might become really good, but as of now not exactly good enough. Vanquish, I feel like I would rather just play more copies of Fell the Dragons or more copy of Rival's Fall if I was going to play Vanquish. But you can still run a bit of variety. And have Vanquish decided not to do that in this deck, but it is definitely one of the few decks that can run Vanquish. Spark of Rebellion, I've already explained why I prefer Bazine over Spark of Rebellion as a discard effect. Those discard effects are extremely relevant against other hard control decks, or even after sideboards against any control matchup for that matter. Punishing One is a card that I've seen in the sideboard from in the deck of Jordan, and I'm not exactly sure what's the purpose of this card. I guess it does... it's a 3/4 that has good stats that can eliminate space units, and then you can potentially sometimes untap it and attack with it again. Not a big fan of it because first of all, we don't really play that many upgrades thing. We only play, of course, the 3 top targets and the 3 death marks, so the odds of being able to untap a Punishing One from that fairly low. It's only an answer for space unit, and as I said earlier, I would rather be playing a removal that can be played for space and for ground instead of running dedicated card for space and for ground. And that's also the reason why I don't play System Patrol Craft as well. I don't need dedicated space answers because my answers can answer indefinitely can answer both space and ground. So why would I need to have specialized answer against ground when I can just answer both just like that? So and the ability to untap is just extremely situational. So yeah, a bit slow for that. Another card that I would definitely like is Forced Surrender. Can be very powerful, of course, as an additional way to get more card advantage. With that being said, I don't think the deck runs enough ways to deal damage, direct damage to the opponent to make this card reliable enough. The big problem I have with Forced Surrender is that most of the time, whenever you're in top deck situation, you want to be running your first discard to discard your opponent 2 cards, and it doesn't have the time to play any cards. While Forced Surrender, you can't do this. You need to attack first, deal the damage, and then play for Forced Surrender after. It can take people by surprise, so I'm not shocked to see this as a one-off or whatever, but I felt that card to be a little bit too situational for my liking. And in a control deck, it's not easy to deal damage. That's the thing. Okay, so we went through over every single card of the deck. So now we're going to talk about the matchup overall. If I had to summarize the strengths and weaknesses of the deck, so the strengths definitely strong against aggro, strong against all the mid-range deck. Like obviously all the boba decks, it's going to be a good matchup for you. Hand blue is kind of against control deck. It is definitely very favored against Kira. Balance versus hand blue. Hand blue is a very the new hand blue is a very 50-50 matchup. It's good against Palpatine, especially Palpatine green. Of course, depends on the amount of hate they're gonna have against you, but most likely a good matchup as well. So it's very well positioned in the current meta. But it does have a few weaknesses that we're gonna go over now. First of all, straight up, what are the bad matchup? I would say the worst matchup are gonna be control decks that are running yellow. Because and the second big weakness of the deck is going to be Old Anne. So Old Anne with the tech DJ combo, incredibly effective against hard control. And you can also do this and also plays I forgot the name. They also plays the Body Rooks. All those cards are just, and the Spark of Rebellion. All those cards are incredibly strong against hard control. So this is definitely going to be a weakness of the deck. Is if you're playing Hold On has always had that reputation of being very strong against hard control. Whether you're playing a double yellow version or green version, I think Hold On is going to find a new purpose in the meta because it can counter those decks very effectively. So let's talk about a little bit about. I know that a lot of people don't like playing against hard control decks. So this is why I would like to give them, just like I did in set 1, I would like to show you what Shadow of the Galaxy is providing as answers against hard control depending on what kind of decks you're playing. So we're going to start off with aggro. So if you're playing aggro, so you're playing Sabine, here's the different card that I as a hard control player I really fear. So first of all, we got anti-heal card, obviously Wolf. If you can play Wolf, one of the things with the healing from Bossk, yes, healing is very powerful in Bossk because you heal 5, 6, or even sometimes 10. But the bad thing about the healing in Bossk is like it's very predictable. Your opponent plays top target, or I have a client in play, I tap it to use the client, and then at this time you can play a Wolf and prevent the healing from happening. And this can be a massive, massive blow to the opponent. So Wolf is even better against predictable ways to heal. If the heal comes out of nowhere, sometimes the hard control will be able to play around the Wolf and play in times where the Wolf abilities is not active. But if if you're playing it as in between as the healing comes out before it gets activated, like it's the case with top target, then it becomes incredibly effective. Other very strong card against Bossk is obviously anything that gets rid of upgrades. My favorite ones for aggro is Disciplined Fang Fighters, that he puts a threat on the board and deal with an upgrade. And obviously Ketsu Onyo, that deals with an upgrade every time it attacks, is also very effective. So those cards, I strongly advise you to have those cards either in the main deck or in the sideboard to deal with those upgrades. If you can get rid of a top target, you can get rid of an entrench, get rid of a death mark. Those are extremely effective. Most of the game that I lose against aggro usually happens because of these fighters. In the later stage of the game, obviously, with the ability for me to heal, and games can sometimes go very long, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have no chance of winning. There's still big plays that aggro can make in order to get back into the game, and one of those big plays is going to be U-Wing Reinforcement. Your wing reinforcement, you can search, especially if you can find a Wolf or the big fighters to get rid of an upgrade, can be an incredibly powerful way to get back into the game. It gives you more chances to hit those powerful sideboard cards And it's in my opinion, Ewing has already, if you're playing aggro in a hard control matchup, in a hard control meta, Ewing has already been a great addition to your sideboard. And then finally, Timely Intervention is also a card that I would consider either in the main deck or on the sideboard. This also allows you to give a second life to your Podamron and your Wreckers in a way for you. So Timely Intervention, the inconvenience, like a card is very slow because you have to pay 1 on top of the very expensive card that you want to play. But against control, you're most likely going to be able to do this. It's once again, any smuggle card, generally speaking, very strong as aggro. So obviously, your Cassians are going to be very good against control. But Timely Intervention, even I'm not talking about Cassian because it's a granted that this card is an automatic 3-of. In here, I'm talking about the card that maybe you're not playing, or maybe you're not playing as much as you would, and the card I would advise you to add either in your main deck or on your sideboard to deal with hard control. And Timely Intervention does help with hard control matchup quite a bit, being able to want those super large units like Snoke, like Kree Dragon, comes out. Having access to Timely Interventions to get back into the game can really, really be powerful. So moving on, so this is pretty much advice for specifically Sabine Green. I mean, obviously some of those cards can be played in Sabine Yellow as well. Here, but with Boba in general, whether it's playing green Boba or yellow Boba, obviously Bazin style should be in all people's sideboard. It's just it's a card that is just incredible against control, but often people don't play the right way. If you have a Bazin, you don't want to be playing Bazin on turn 1 against control, because at this stage of the game you don't really know what you need to get rid of. But more importantly, your objective is you're still the aggressor, and if you're opening the game with a Bazin, that's not really going to put a lot of pressure on the opponent because it's only a 1/3. So my advice is to either keep your Bazin or smuggle your Bazin. Resource your Bazin so you can smuggle later on in the game and remove the very super crucial card that would complete. So you can remove Super Laser Blast at the right moment, removing make an opening to keep Locking TIE Phantom alive. That kind of game-winning play that would be strongly advised. So Bazin is just incredible, especially if you're playing Cop Veins. Then Bazin becomes even better. You can also use McClunky to make Bazin even better. You can bring back to your hand, play it back, or you can play a new adventure to blink your Bazin and get yourself another discard. All those plays are very valid. Obviously, another card, Body Rook, is very strong because get rid of non-units. It's even better than Bazin, obviously, but it's only playable in double yellow. You could play this potentially in green, but then the card costs 5, which makes it very awkward because you still need to put pressure on your opponent. So paying 5 for a 3/3 not really great, but in double yellow, it's just an amazing, amazing sideboard card. It comes to play, do a 2-for-1, get rid of the important card for the same reason Bazin, and blinking it with a new adventure becomes even better. Obviously, Locking TIE Phantom is also great because what happens, your opponent plays Power of the Dark Side, you get to choose which units get defeated, you choose Locking TIE Phantoms and nothing happens. So as long as Locking TIE Phantom is in play, Power of the Dark Side is completely disabled, or any Power of the Dark Side effects also works with Avenger. That's just incredibly impactful. The card cannot be defeated by normal means. The only card in a Bossk deck that can deal with the TIE Phantom is going to be a Make an Opening or a Snoke, or like an Entrench. But Entrench is kind of not a great solution because it means that your Power Dark Side are still disabled. And even more so, if you have a way to give Locking TIE Phantom like an experience token, I've seen some Boba deck, for example, play TIE Advanced to buff the TIE Phantoms. If you're able to do this, Locking TIE Phantoms literally is unkillable. Like, it literally is unkillable. The only way to deal with it is just to play an Entrench, and then as I said, the Power Dark Side is still going to be disabled. So TIE Phantom is just incredible for that. So really good, strong cards against control. We of course have Cop Veins. Cop Veins is just a recursive, grindy card. It dies, it brings another unit in play. It's just a card to deal with for control. Also puts a decent amount of pressure with a 3 attack, and allows you to find more ways to find your sideboard cards, notably your Bazin. So great card as well. So if you are playing hard control, then the answer is pretty simple. You need to be playing yellow, because yellow gives you access to 2 cards that are absolutely crucial for this matchup, which is Bazin and Bounty Hunter Crew. So the hard control mirror is very much just about vigilance. It's about who can meal the other one better. Both of us play loads of removal and very few threats, which means that killing your opponent in traditional means just by playing units is not going to work, because your opponent is just going to answer whatever the opponent is doing. What the best you can hope for is deal some damage to the opponent base, so then whenever it comes down to the meal, he's going to die faster from the meal. So that's the best you can hope for. But at the end of the day, you're still going to have to meal your opponent, so which makes the Vigilance the most important card of the matchup by far. So what is the best way to win the game? By playing Vigilance more often than your opponent and by preventing your opponent from playing Vigilance. How do you do this? With this card. So Bazinital is the way you do this. And obviously you get back Vigilance with Bounty Hunter Crew. You can bring back your own Vigilance to counter the opponent discard, but also to make it so you have more copies of Vigilance in your deck than your opponent. Search Your Feelings can also do that, but it does it less efficiently because it doesn't give you additional copies of Vigilance. It just allows you to see your copies of Vigilance earlier than you would normally. So I found Bounty Hunter Crew to be far better for that. Also far better, Bounty Hunter Crew gives you a body that can sometimes attack, deal some damage, and obviously Restock is also going to be very good in the matchup. So this is what I was talk about earlier. I believe that in the current meta, I believe Bossk Blue is a stronger deck, but if you're going to be running in a meta that is full of hard control, then you should probably play Boba Blue instead of Bossk Blue, because Boba Blue will murder Bossk. I think like the matchup is almost unlosable for Boba, because Boba will be playing Bazine and Bounty Hunter Crew in the main deck, meaning that, and if a player has, in a hard control matchup, games are so long that you're very likely to see all those cards. And if you see Bazine and Bounty Hunter Crew, you get able to discard your opponent Vigilances, you get to get back your Vigilance in hand, and your opponent cannot do that. You're going to win the matchup, no problem. So that's one of the big arguments, in my opinion, to be playing a yellow-based. You can also do this with Afra, even though I think Boba is a much better leader than Afra, and you also can do this with Aiden yellow as well. So anyway, and also of course a Thrawn yellow would also be able to do that. But yeah, yellow-based control deck will beat Bossk hard control for that very reason. I do myself play some Bazine in my sideboard, but obviously my Bazine are going to be costing 2 more, and I don't play Bounty Hunter Crew because it just takes too much spice in my sideboard. You can fix this with the sideboard in Bossk. The problem is that sometimes it's not enough, because what happens is that you lose the first game. And if you lose the first game, there's no guarantee that you're going to have enough time to play the game too. So having your answers to hard control in the sideboards can be very tricky. And obviously having those cards in the main deck would really hurt the deck a lot. So I feel like it's not really a fixable issue. And this might be what leads Bossk to an early grave. But obviously it's all going to come down to the meta. If you're playing RAM control, the classic... we used to be playing the Emperor's Legion. Now we play Palpatine's Return, which is far better. You get those Relentless. You get to put back those Relentless back into play. In those Relentless, Palpatine's Return shenanigans are very difficult to deal with for hard control, and this is obviously going to be your ticket for winning the game. Playing Vigilance on your own is not really going to help. However, Palpatine's Return to Relentless is going to help you, so this is going to be a good way to win. Also find Celestius Crum surprisingly good against hard control. Very easy to kind of like play around Power of the Dark Side, allow you to protect your units against Power of the Dark Side, and then you can, if your fearing opponent plays playing a Super Laser Blast, you can bounce the Celestius Crum back into your hand and replay it. It's just very annoying to deal with for control. With Yonghan, how do you win this matchup? So Yonghan has actually a pretty decent matchup against Bossk, because he has a lot of cards that are really good at doing 2-for-1. So all the Yodas, Yoda, K2SO, and I forgot the name, and Pillage basically do a 2-for-1 effectively card advantage, and you play so many of those, basically you win the matchup by outvaluing your opponent. You're also playing card that smuggles, like Cassian, like Cassian. So normally you would think that Old Anne would have a bad matchup against hard control, because it has all those because it's a very mid-rangey control deck, so it would lose against a hard control. But Yonghan has so many assets for this matchup that ultimately is able to counteract this inherent weakness. And obviously there is ways you can improve your matchup even better. So first one of them is by playing tech. Tech is obviously great because it's almost an infinite source of card advantage as long as it stays alive. So if you play it at the right timing, you can really get a lot of cards from him. So this card is incredibly threatening for a hard control deck. Disabling Firefighter is another card you can play as a young hand to get rid of enemy upgrades. One of the best plays to get rid of Deathmark. If the Bossk deck is able to play Deathmark and draw 4 cards, then suddenly your card advantage plan goes down to the toilet, and that can be very complicated. Disabling Factors can counter this. And obviously Forced Surrender, you are going to be the aggressor in this matchup, so you are more than likely to be able to deal a couple of damage here and there. And if you're able to it's a matchup that is all about the card advantage. So if you're able to trigger a Forced Surrender, you basically can win the game on the spot with that card. And that is it. That is everything I wanted to say about this hard control deck. If you got any questions about the deck or any other idea on how to counter it, or any idea on how to improve the deck, feel free to put it on the comments of the video. If you like that video, please like and subscribe. So if you are wondering what was my record into winning against in the showdown, so I basically won 2-0 versus Boba Green. I then won 2-0 in the mirror match against another Bossk player. Then I won 1-0 versus a Palpatine blue deck. A Palpatine blue deck that was very focused on countering control, so I got very lucky to be able to get that win. I also won. And then I did a 1-1 draw against Han blue, but this 3 victory 1 draw record was enough for me to get into the top 4. And then in the semifinal, I beat Sabine green deck 2-0. And I've met in the final the same Han blue deck that I did draw previously, and I won against him 2-1. So I actually only dropped 2 match in the entire event, and that was both time against the Han blue deck. So I felt the deck was very, very solid, and the meta game was really favorite for it. I can see a meta where that wouldn't be the case though. But there's definitely a deck that is powerful enough that it's going to force the meta to adapt to it, because it's a deck that if people don't try to counter it, it's going to dominate the meta. That's for sure. Anyway, thank you so much, and if you like the video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time for another video.